Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question might seem a little bit familiar if you're a longtime fan of the channel, or a short-time fan of the channel. I went ahead and remade this video because some new information has come to light. Nick controls a Graffdigger's cage and he kills Amy's Enduring Innocence. Can Enduring Innocence return to the play? And the answer is no, for exactly the same reason I gave last time. While in Amy's graveyard, Enduring Innocence counts as a creature card. Graffdigger's cage says creature cards in graveyards cannot enter the battlefield. Therefore, Enduring Innocence stays in Amy's graveyard. Now that's pretty straightforward and nothing has changed in that discussion since the last time. Both of those are not the case for the related scenario I proposed where the Graffdigger's cage is changed to a Containment Priest. Now, in this case we have a replacement effect that wants to modify how a permanent enters the battlefield. So we'll need to take a look at this rule here. In case anyone's wondering why we need this rule, or actually the analogous rule covering can't enter the battlefield effects with Graffdigger's cage example, I have an in-depth explanation for that in my video about Grist the Hungertide versus Graffdigger's cage, so you can check that out if you'd like more information. So anyway, with Enduring Innocence entering through a Containment Priest, we'll need to take a look at this rule and see if Containment Priest's replacement effect applies. We can see that when we're deciding whether any given replacement effect applies to the event of Enduring Innocence entering the battlefield, we have to take into account any replacement effects that have already modified it, how it enters. And so if we had a Sculpting Steel that was entering the battlefield as a copy of an artifact creature, Containment Priest definitely would replace that with exiling the Sculpting Steel, because its copy effect has modified that event such that Sculpting Steel is now a creature. But that's not relevant to what's happening with the Enduring Innocence, because the thing that makes it into a non-creature enchantment is not a replacement effect. So let's keep reading. We also take into account continuous effects from the permanent's own static abilities that would apply to it once it's on the battlefield. A famous example of this is that Containment Priest can stop a Heliod from entering, but only if your devotion is too high. Otherwise, Heliod's own static ability will generate a continuous effect that makes Heliod not be a creature. So if your devotion is below the threshold, Containment Priest will not apply to it. Another well-known fact straight from the Judge Vault is that this check gets made immediately before Heliod is actually physically on the battlefield. So the 1 white mana in Heliod's own cost will not contribute towards your devotion total. Unfortunately, this too is irrelevant to the Enduring Innocence scenario, because the continuous effect that makes Enduring Innocence not be a creature is set up by the triggered ability that returns Enduring Innocence to the battlefield, not from one of its own static abilities. And that leaves just one final thing. Continuous effects that already exist and would apply to Enduring Innocence also get taken into account. And this means that if there was an Opalescence in play, any non-aura enchantment that would enter without being cast would be getting exiled by Containment Priest. To evaluate whether this line is applicable, we'll need one other important piece of information. The triggered ability from Enduring Innocence puts it onto the battlefield and creates an effect that says it is an enchantment. According to this rule, that continuous effect applies simultaneously with the Enduring Innocence entering the battlefield. There's just one problem. Just like in the Heliod example, the Containment Priest replacement effect applies immediately before Enduring Innocence enters the battlefield. And that means the effect that makes Enduring Innocence not be a creature does not already exist at that time. Accordingly, like the Graffdigger's cage, the Containment Priest should also stop the Enduring Innocence from entering the battlefield. Okay, well, that is what I said the last time, and I stand by that ruling if you wanted to go by rules as written. Some people have commented that there is a difference between when a continuous effect exists and when it starts to apply. Now that is true, and the standard that we need to hit per the CR is that the continuous effect needs to already exist prior to the time when the permanent enters the battlefield. Now this other rule says that the continuous effect applies simultaneously with the permanent entering the battlefield, but it doesn't mention when it starts to exist. On the other hand, Enduring Innocence, and the other cards we'll talk about in the next common objection, says that it returns to the battlefield and then sets up its continuous effect in that order. CR 611.2e gives us the ability to say that these occur at the same time, but I can't find any justification for the concept that setting up the continuous effect happens any earlier than that, which is what I would need in order to feel comfortable saying that this continuous effect already existed. Now, some other people commented that the text and gatherer rulings of cards like Old Growth Troll and Bronzehide Lion are evidence that continuous effects that are part of triggered abilities that return permanents to the battlefield are taken into account as that process is being carried out. After all, how could you know what type of permanent would be able to enchant if Bronze-Hide Lion did not already have enchant creature yet? Or even more basic, how would it be able to enchant anything at all if it wasn't an aura as it was entering the battlefield? Now, I could say that having auras that weren't cast enter attached to something is a game rule and not a replacement effect, and therefore it operates under a different part of the CR than the Containment Priest example that we're covering. But the truth is, these effects have always been kind of hand-wavy as far as how they technically function, and the issue with how Containment Priest interacts with them is a real concern too. This is a bit of a spoiler for this month's patron pick, but if you really wanted them to work properly, I think effects like this should read something like return Bronze-Hide Lion attached to a creature you control. It's an aura enchantment with enchant creature and loses all its other abilities. If you really wanted their abilities to function to a proper standard of rigor. But that's enough of Judge Dave whining about how he would fix the rules. Does Containment Priest stop Bronze-Hide Lion and Enduring Innocence or not? And like I said, if you want to go rules as written, my opinion is that it should stop them. Rules as intended, the answer is that these cards can enter through Containment Priest just fine. As evidence, I've linked to a bleat from Matt Tabak in the description. If you're not up on the latest old people slang, that's a clever portmanteau of tweet plus blue sky, which is apparently the new official social media platform of Magic's rules posting. No doubt they had to make the switch after I started a Twitter myself and started hounding them with questions just like this. Well, let's close out by applying this information to a challenge question to test your understanding. Amy's Grizzly Bears dies while she controls Valkyrie's Call and Giada Font of Hope. Does Grizzly Bears enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counters on it? And like the Containment Priest, Giada has a replacement effect that wants to modify the event of a creature entering the battlefield. Now, I think the answer would be pretty straightforward if we wanted to know whether Giada applied to something like a clone copying an angel. Because remember, replacement effects that have already changed how something is entering get taken into account when deciding how such replacement effects apply. And likewise, continuous effects from the permanent's own static abilities also get taken into account. So a Giada would buff an adaptive automaton with the name type of angel. Also, continuous effects that already exist and would apply to the permanent that's entering are also taken into account. So with a conspiracy naming angel, everything would be getting buffed. You can see that the situation with the Valkyrie's Call plus Giada falls into that same murky, ambiguous area from the previous zone as the Containment Priest plus Enduring Innocence from earlier. And so that would mean that the Grizzly Bears entering via Valkyrie's Call would get counters. Now, I've spoken out before about how I don't like ruling against the letter of the law unless there's some dire need to. I'm not sure whether that's really the case here, but I can say for sure that Wizards of the Coast is aware of this issue and they'll likely change something soon. If you looked at that bleed I mentioned earlier, you might have seen in the thread one of the other people mentioned a tweet from Jess Dunks, Magic's current rules manager. Now this tweet is a few months old, and it was published shortly after my original video on the Giada plus Valkyrie's Call example. I've linked that in the description too, but as you can see, it indicates that Wizards is aware of the issue and is looking at changing it. In the same tweet, he acknowledges the unusual result of the two angels, and that's one of the reasons why, seemingly confirming the rules as written answer that I presented in this video is correct, while at the same time hinting that we should be prepared for a change. While nothing in any of the relevant CR has changed since that date, it does seem reasonable to expect that something will soon, especially as many cards where this ruling might become relevant are popping up more and more in competitive play. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.